My name is Jorge Gutierrez, and I co-created with my wife El Tigre, The Adventures of Manny Rivera, which is a TV show for Nickelodeon. And most recently, I co-wrote and directed The Book of Life for Real Effects Studios and 20th Century Fox. Originally I went to CalArts, California Institute of the Arts, and we had a lot of visiting artists, people who were working in the industry, and they would come in and show us what they were doing. And for me, it was seeing, wow, that guy went to school here 5 years ago and now he has his own TV show. Like, it made it seem like a doable thing. Like when I met Craig McCracken and Gendy, they came to visit, and I remember thinking, like, I want to be the Mexican Gendy. Like, I want to do what those guys are doing. And so as soon as I graduated, I had a student short, won a student Emmy, and that opened lots of doors. But no one would hire me because all my stuff looked Mexican. And so a producer at Nickelodeon said, I'm not going to hire you, but I look at this stuff and it's great, but I'm going to give you a piece of advice. The only person who's going to hire you to do this type of stuff is you. And I was like, what? And he said, you have to pitch your own stuff. That's the only way you're going to get to do this stuff. And so that's what I did. I just pitched and pitched and pitched. Eventually Sony optioned and bought my first internet cartoon, and I was off in that world. I was officially a creator. I worked really hard, and thanks to that, lots of doors opened in TV, and I started doing pilots everywhere. I did one at Warner's, I did one at, two at Disney. Eventually El Tigre happened at Nickelodeon. We worked really, really hard. El Tigre ended up winning 7 Emmys in 1 year, which was pretty crazy. Thanks to El Tigre doing so well, lots of doors opened in the feature side, and I finally got to make Book of Life. Well, Book of Life originally was at a different studio, and at that time, I remember thinking, if we make a movie that I'm not happy with, that is something that does not feel like what the original intent was, and it's very successful, I'm screwed for life. I will never feel good about what I've done. If we make a movie that I'm really proud of, but no one sees, it's just as bad. So how can I try to make something that I think is really good, that hopefully a lot of people enjoy? And so typical creative differences happened at that first studio. And I look back now and I'm very thankful that they were so nice and gave me my rights and allowed me to continue. But it was definitely a moment where I thought, I'd rather not make a version of this that I'm not happy with at all. I can live with not making this movie if it's not going to be the right version of it. And which was very foolish of me, probably financially, but as an artist, that's all we have, right? The most powerful word an artist has is no. And so that's a big lesson I learned there. When I was an intern, my first job out of school, I was an intern at Sony on Stuart Little as an animation intern. And I met an animator there named Brad Booker, who, as time would go by, would leave animation and become a development producer. And he's the guy who I kept in touch with. And so after Book of Life didn't work out at that first studio, I had been in touch with him, and he said, look, we've never made a theatrical feature of our own. We're ready to take that plunge. We like you, we like your idea. If you trust us, we'll trust you. And so at that point, I had felt, well, I left Mexico to make things about Mexico. I guess I'm gonna have to leave Hollywood to make a Hollywood movie. And I liked that there was no house style, and I liked that there was no legacy there with, we made the Ice Ages or the Shreks or these giant franchises. That pressure wasn't there for me. And so I had never directed a movie, and they never made a movie. So it was blind faith on each other, and I kind of felt like this is the way for me to get my stuff out there, is by going somewhere where there's no giant legacy, and I can be a part of the new era and a new foundation and be there as this new tree starting to grow. I mean, Real Effects had been around for service work, but for original stuff, they'd never made a movie at that point. So that was very exciting for me. And then I imagined, I'm gonna go to Dallas and everybody from El Tigre is gonna come with me. No one came. So I had to start over. But it was a complete adventure. Like making the movie, moving out of LA and just sort of going into the Wild West, well, the opposite direction, to go make this movie. Oh, absolutely. Guillermo has always been one of my film heroes. And so I had been working on Book of Life at Real Effects for a year, and they asked, who would be your dream producer? And, of course, Guillermo del Toro. And at the time, he was directing The Hobbit, so I thought, well, there's no way he can do it. And as soon as we started talking, he came back. He stopped working on The Hobbit, came back to LA. At that point, he was the most popular, director. It seemed like he got offered everything. So I thought, oh, for sure, we'll never be able to meet with him. And so meeting after meeting getting canceled, eventually I got to go to his house, his memorabilia, crazy house. And it was a disastrous pitch. It was kind of a legendary, terrible pitch. And then at the end, I thought, man, I really screwed this up. Like, at least I got to meet him, right? That's how I felt. And so when I was done with the presentation, he agreed with me. He said that was one of the worst pitches I've ever seen. And so at that point, I stood up to leave just to shake his hand, and he said, sit down. And he said, Jorge, I know who you are. I have two daughters. On Saturday mornings, we would watch El Tigre. And so I know your sense of humor, I know your art style, and I know how you see Mexico. So of course I want to produce the Book of Life. And he became a mentor and a very tough teacher, and ultimately he became a really good friend. Well, it was one of those things where the moment you decide to make things personal, right? For me, it was pouring the stories out of my grandparents and my parents and my life. When you get rejected, they're not rejecting just your idea, they're rejecting your life and your family. So it was heartbreaking early on. And then I kind of realized I can't take that stuff personal. The people who are developing stuff, you're making a TV show or a movie, and it has to fit into what they're looking for. So I learned to adjust, and I learned to pitch things. I learned to pitch things in a way where I wouldn't pitch a Nickelodeon show to Disney, and I wouldn't pitch an R-rated movie to an animation studio. Like, I learned early on, I have to build and create things that I'm very comfortable with, but that fit in a place by nature. And so that's been kind of the thing I learned. Because early on, I would just pitch the same things everywhere. And I treat all my creations like my kids. So now I know better, like, well, you're good at basketball, and you're good at drawing. Like, I know now where to take my ideas. And then I know there's ideas I have that cannot be made in at least in the American animation industry. So I'm tinkering and tailoring them for other markets. Well, I signed a 2-picture deal with Real Effects, and I'm currently working on a Kung Fu space Western, and I'm having a blast. And I live in Texas now, so I have to make a Western. It's my favorite genre, and I've always loved Kung Fu movies ever since I was a kid in Mexico. Bruce Lee was one of my first heroes. And like everybody in my generation, of course, Star Wars was a huge influence. So this is my love letter to Kung Fu movies, Westerns, and sci-fi movies. And we haven't announced it yet, but we more than likely have a distribution and production partner that I'm really excited about. And then I'm also hopefully going to be doing a Google short for the VR. So I'm super excited about that. And then I think that's the only stuff I can mention